Hey everyone, Tactics here, kicking off my Season 3 Dungeon Guide series with a returning dungeon from Season 1, ARA-KARA. Now, because we do have a bunch of returning dungeons, the guides for those dungeons are going to be a little bit different for my Season 3 series, because a lot of players have obviously played those dungeons relatively recently. So instead of giving you the full rundown of the entire dungeon, I'm instead going to focus on the major changes moving from Season 1 or Season 2 to the current Season 3, including some very significant changes in this dungeon to the final boss. Plus, I'll be going through some tips and tricks that we've learned over the course of the season that this dungeon was already in the pool to hopefully give you some tips that will help you out right off the bat in Season 3. I will, of course, still be talking about all those important abilities that you need to be aware of if you're new to the dungeon. Plus, if you want something even more in depth, I have my written guides over on the Method website, which I'll link down below as well, which you can check out. I will also not have a route in this video. Instead, I'm doing a full pug-friendly route recommendation video closer to season launch once count of mobs has actually been determined. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you know when that goes live. Otherwise, let's start with a quick recap of the tailoring buff in this dungeon. So basically, throughout the instance, there's going to be these bodies of discordant attendants, and players with at least 25 Guard tailoring can interact with them, which will give them an extra action button for 1 minute. And if you use this extra action button, it gets consumed, only one use per discordant attendant, and it says 12-second stun. Now, the interesting thing about this, on top of it being a 12-second stun, is that it does ignore otherwise immune to CC mobs that aren't bosses. So basically all the mini bosses in this first area and the large scarab guys, the blood guards in the second area, which are lieutenants and can't otherwise be CC'd, can be CC'd by this ability, which is quite useful to take away interrupts or interrupt some of the new AoE damage abilities we'll talk about in a second. So this is a useful thing, but definitely not mandatory. Now, let's get into some of the important or changed abilities. Right off the top, I know a lot of people are familiar with the annoying slow that goes out from the random target ravenous crawlers. This slow has been removed. They still jump to random people, so they'll still deal damage, but you're no longer going to be perma-slowed trying to group this initial pull, which is really, really nice. Getting into some interrupts here, the most important one is definitely from Ixen at the beginning. The first mini boss you're going to face, he has the horrifying shrill AoE fear. You want to make sure every single cast of that gets interrupted. The second most important interrupt is from the trilling attendants. They have a channel called Resonant Barrage, and this just pulses for damage constantly, so you want to interrupt that. You can also use a CC against this because it is a channel, so it will stop casting if you CC it. But it is not a huge deal to use an interrupt on it anymore because the lockout of Resonant Barrage and the bolt attack on these mobs has been changed this season to be the same spell class. So even if you kick Resonant Barrage, it will still lock out the attendant from casting web bolts. Speaking of web bolts, lots of mobs cast that in this dungeon. That's where all of your spare kicks are going to be going. Now, the bulk of your damage in this area outside of those web bolts is going to be coming from a couple random target debuffs. The first is the Venomous Spit. This one was quite dangerous in Season 1 because there's just so many of these engorged crawler mobs. Not a ton has changed here. The cast is now instant cast, but it doesn't really matter because there's not a ton of initial damage. But basically, as many poison dispels as you can bring in your group is going to be valuable throughout this dungeon, as you will notice. These engorged crawlers also no longer explode when they're low health, so you will need to kill them all the way. The other random target debuff is now the Bleeding Jab ability from the Jabbing Flyers. Previously, this only actually went out on tanks, is my understanding, but now it's going to be going out on the entire group. This was a recent change on the PTR, so there is a chance that they will peel back on this slightly, but at least currently, this is bleeds on your entire party if you're pulling a lot of these Jabbing Flyers, and that combined with the poisons can be quite dangerous if you have a bunch of stacks of each. So again, poison spells quite valuable to remove the poison aspect of it. Otherwise, things like Dwarf Racials, things like Evoker Cleanses, but really there's going to be too many bleeds for you to handle regardless, so just a lot of healing and potentially defensive usage is required. Other than that, there is a notable nerf to the Call of the Brood channel from Nacht, which is the second mini-boss that you often face. Previously, this was a super dangerous cast, did a ton of damage. Basically, the damage is mostly gone from this ability, and it just summons a bunch more of those engorged crawler ads that we previously mentioned. So they've taken the danger out of the damage and into this spawning ads. Now, after you defeat all three mini bosses in this initial area, you can take on the first boss in Avanoxx, which is a fight that hasn't really changed from Season 1. However, there was some new strategies that people figured out over the course of that season that can drastically speed up this boss fight, allowing you to cleave the ads as well as the boss without empowering her. For those that don't know, throughout this boss fight, starved crawlers will spawn from eggs that randomly spawn somewhere in the room, and these ads will just fixate a random player and attempt to melee them repeatedly. But if Avanoxx actually gets too close to them, she will consume them and gain the insatiable damage increase, which often is going to lead to a wipe. So you want to avoid that. The original strategy, and one that is still fine for pug groups where you don't really trust people, was to just have your tank run as far away from the eggs as possible, and then range will just kind of slow and cleave those guys down, and then melee will stay on the boss and swap if needed. However, the problem with this is that you lose a lot of boss damage, and you don't actually kill the ads very quickly either. So a strat that developed was that they have the entire group stack up between the eggs and the boss, where the entire group is standing outside of the red circle created by the boss when you target her. And basically, as long as you keep the ads outside of that circle, she will not eat any of them, and you are free to just cleave them down while also cleaving onto the boss. The key here, though, is that you are going to be taking some auto attack damage from these spiders that they'll be able to hit you, but on mid-level keys, this wasn't really a problem, and even then, you can use things like stuns, knockups, other CCs to chain CC these mobs to prevent those auto attacks from going off. Again, very fast if you use this strategy correctly, but it is a little risky in pug groups, so you don't necessarily need to do it. For the other abilities, the big AoE is from Alerting Shrill. This is the most dangerous ability of the encounter in terms of individual damage hit, so that's where you want to press your defensives. This is also what causes those eggs to hatch. The other AoE ability is called Gossamer Onslaught. This does less damage, but it spawns puddles underneath all players, which will probably kill you if you get hit by them. But since they serve as area denial, you don't want to be all spread out. It can be easier if you stack with one other group member, or as many as you can realistically, and then just move together to put all these puddles in the same general space, just so you have more room to play with during this encounter. For the tanks, there's the Voracious Bite ability, and while the cast itself only kind of deals a moderate amount of physical damage, it does apply a 50% damage amp to you for 10 seconds, so you need to be careful of things like melee swings that happen with the debuff, and even that Alerting Shrill AoE that I previously mentioned, as that also gets amped. Moving into the next area of the dungeon, we have those hulking blood guards that I referenced earlier. They still have the Bulwark of the Weak passive, so they're going to be reducing the damage of all nearby allies. So you want to make sure whenever there's a blood guard, you focus it down specifically. Now, they also previously had a big individual raid hit and slam, which has been removed and replaced with Locust Swarm. So this is going to be a channel damage over an 8-second channel as opposed to one individual big hit. So you can use things like healing seas now to mitigate this damage. The other thing it lets you do is it lets you use that tailoring stun to interrupt this channel entirely if you wait for it to begin casting and then you stun it. And that effectively mitigates almost the entire portion of damage from that ability. So quite useful there. In terms of interrupts, we have those web bolts we talked about previously, and we also have the revolting volley cast from the bloodstained web mages here, so you want to make sure every single one of those is interrupted, and then spare interrupts into the bolts. There's also the alarm shrill cast from the sentry stag shells in this area, and basically if this ever is successful, you are in for a bad time. It aggroes everything nearby, it spawns an additional blood guard, so you want to make sure that you are CCing this mob before the cast completes, and just kind of chaining CCs afterwards each time the cast gets close to completing. That brings us to the second boss, Anub'zekt, another one that hasn't really changed much from the first. So one player at a time is going to get debuffed here with the infestation dot, and then this person will need to probably use a defensive or just get some extra spot healing. When it expires, you drop a circle, and this will move in lines towards random players throughout the encounter, applying a dot to anyone it touches. So if possible, you want to try and drop this away from your group just to make it a little bit easier to avoid them. The infestation debuff itself actually rotates through your entire group before repeating, unless of course you have a death that messes with the order, but this does allow you to have a general idea of when you're going to be getting that nasty dot again, so you can have a defensive ready and know when you need to press it. Burrow Charge is the other big mechanic of this fight, which always targets a player at ranged. If there is one, it charges at them, deals damage to anyone in the path, and does a big hit at the end. You can actually bait this consistently on the same player if you have all but one of your players stand in melee, and then one stand far away. It will always go on that far player, so you can do this on a class like an Evoker or a Mage who is very mobile, a Hunter even, and then they are actually able to use like a Blink or a Dash or a Disengage while the boss is in motion of the charge and avoid that ending hit, which is quite useful. If you can't avoid that ending hit, you want to make sure you do press a personal there. Outside of this, there is a tank targeted frontal in Impale, so make sure you point your boss away from the rest of your group. And then ads will occasionally spawn in this first phase as well, which will just try and channel Silken Restraint onto a random player to root them, so you can use interrupts or CCs once the channel has begun to stop it. When the boss reaches full energy, the room fills with a swarm, leaving just a single safe circle just in front of the boss itself. You need to get into this circle, and then you stay in it for about 25 seconds while this channel continues. Debuffs continue to go out in this phase, and the frontal also continues in this phase. So what I recommend, have your tank be on the right side of the circle if you're facing the boss. The rest of your group is going to be on the left side, and basically all the frontals are going to go on the right side, so no one needs to avoid them. And then whoever gets the debuff can just move towards the right side and drop it off over there, and then move back to the left side once they've dropped it off. And from there, the fight just repeats. Moving on to the end of the fight, we again have an important AoE interrupt in Venom Volley from the Blood Overseer, so you want to make sure that is interrupted. The reinforced drones and the winged carriers in this area also still drop that black blood when you tag them for the first time. There's a puddle on the ground which forms into a slime if you touch it that roots you, and you can use things like CCs to break that root and free yourself, on top of course, freedom effects as well. So just be careful of those puddles. The reinforced drones specifically also have a new ability here. Previously, they had a tank buster that put a stacking slow on the tank. This has been changed. It's now a passive on their auto attacks, which stack up a magic debuff that slows, does some magic damage, and then also has a healing reduction attached to it. So tanks will need to be dispelled by the healer here as often as possible. Obviously, Dwarf Racial has a bit of value here as well. But the other thing is this magic dot can also be removed by freedom effects like the previous tank buster debuff was. So things like freedom, things like Tiger Lust can also reset your stacks, so you can use those in coordination with magic dispels to kind of make sure you keep your stacks as low as possible. And it's important that you have one of these dispels or some sort of leap ability for when the Overseer casts the erupting webs, because those are going to be nasty stun circles that you need to be able to get out of. And if you're super slowed, that's going to be a problem, right? So you still want to save movement abilities if you have them. Otherwise, use your healer to dispel you at a good time. That brings us to the final boss here. And this one has had several significant nerfs, which a lot of Season 1 players are going to be happy to hear, because he was an absolute pug farmer throughout that first season. So first things first, cultivated poisons. This is a poison dot that shoots out waves in set directions on expiration or removal. In Season 1, this targeted your entire group every cast. Now it is only targeting 3 players, so less people are taking that dot damage, and there are fewer waves for you to dodge. On top of that, the waves themselves have had their initial damage drastically reduced. It was a massive 50% nerf to their initial damage, and instead they now have a dot component. So again, kind of reducing the one-shottiness of this mechanic and allowing you to survive if you press a defensive or get some extra spot healing if you mess up and get hit by one. Great change, especially for pugs. As for the other mechanics on this fight, make sure you're avoiding those erupting webs that we discussed earlier. And of course, those blood workers are still running around the room here. And if you tag them, they'll drop those puddles of black blood that we discussed earlier that will root you if you stand in them. But you will actually need to use that for the Cosmic Singularity ability, as if you aren't rooted or you don't have some sort of pull-in prevention like Death's Advanced, it will try and pull you in and then explode for a bunch of damage. Back in Season 1, this was basically death if you didn't have an immunity, but this got similar treatment to those waves. So if you mess up now, the damage is pretty livable. They've reduced it by 50%, but there was a debuff that it also applied to people that survived, which maybe you don't know about because it used to basically one-shot you, which was a 75% damage taken increase and damage done reduction, and this now lasts 20 seconds. So while you will survive this hit now, you'll be doing a lot less damage and be in a lot more danger of other mechanics for 20 seconds. But again, I think this overall is definitely nice for pugs because you just won't be instantly down a person and you have the ability to recover. Assuming you're using the root puddles to stay away from this pull-in, make sure that you have an interrupt or a CC ready for when the pull-in ends so you can free yourself from that slime ad and be ready to dodge those webs that we talked about. And also keep in mind that abilities like leaps and blinks, if timed well, actually allow you to avoid that last singularity hit, which is the dangerous one, meaning that if you do the timing correctly, you don't actually need to get rooted in a puddle. You can just leap or blink or whatever it is, but it does require a very specific timing, but something you can practice. But that is it for my ARA-KARA recap for Season 3. Hopefully this helps you out, and if it did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more dungeon and raid guide content, including pug-friendly routes coming very, very soon. As always, shout out to all my amazing Patreons for their continued support, and I'll see everyone in the next video.